I'll go ahead and call the February 20th, 2024 Public Safety Committee meeting to order. First order of business is the review and approval of the February 12th, 2024 minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes. And the next thing is our entree into a larger discussion this evening about adult use marijuana. This particular ordinance is to revise the criminal code of Lakewood as it relates to marijuana. And it's ordinance 40/2023, which was initially introduced by Councilman Schackner and a couple other people on December 18th, 2023, and then the second reading was January 1st, 2024. And I believe we have a couple versions that have been flying around today. I've tried my hardest to stay on top of them. But we have the as introduced ordinance, and then the law department also had some proposed edits. Trying to wrap my head around them, but as a general matter, I'll throw it over to Councilman Schackner to go over the intent of this legislation, and then we'll probably have a discussion with the law department and the administration about where they're at on it. I don't know that, particularly with the level of changes that we've seen today, that it's ripe for passage today, but certainly ripe for discussion. So, Councilman Schackner, can you kind of go through this for us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Essentially, the purpose of this is in all the definitional sections and other drug abuse sections of the code, is to put this more in line with the Ohio Revised Code, specifically the now, was it 3780 or let me see, 3780 adult use cannabis control, and also because our code is based, of course, on 292511 and other in chapter 2925, which has to do with controlled substances. So just throwing in some definitions in here, and also some offenses that are now obviated by 3780. Mainly 3780 has a provision that talks about what is prohibited conduct. Interestingly, the legislation had no adjustments to 292511, which creates some confusion. But mainly, I'll go through it real quick, section by section, and just give a little bit of my thoughts behind it. Each provision, some, it ain't the gospel. It's more of, some of these are policy choices in terms of how Lakewood wants to treat certain offenses. For example, we'll go to we'll just start with page 8, which is really just changing some of the definitions and replacing marijuana with adult use cannabis or marijuana within the meaning of section 3719.01 of the revised code, and that mimics now 3780 when they're using their definitions of what cannabis is to be considered. And new H has adult use extract or extract, a specific definition. From my memory, what we previously would use in the criminal world under 292511 was hashish would be the catch-all, essentially, for marijuana in a liquid distillate form. But there wasn't very clear direction on how you prove that or what that actually means. And some interpretations was it had to be a certain chemical process in order to be that hashish, and others disagreed. But now there is an actual definition for adult use extract or extract within 3780, so that just mimics that. Now going on to page, is it 14, 15? Well, the gift of marijuana, right? So that really just adjusts gift of marijuana to an amount that exceeds the prohibited amount. So it's in between the amount of what the limits you're allowed to have versus up to the felony level or greater than. I'm thinking of something else. So basically, the prohibited amounts for people to possess within 3780 as it stands currently is 2.5 ounces of adult use cannabis in any form except for adult use extract, 15 grams in the form of an extract, or any amount for a person over the age of 21. The next, because no amount is legal for if somebody is over the age of 21, under the age of 21. Now there's a portion I got rid of it, and that's just the policy decision, but there was a step up in terms of violating this gift of marijuana if it's in the vicinity after a it's an escalating in terms of if you're gifting marijuana within the vicinity of a school within 1,000 feet. So it starts off as looks like an M3 and then continues therefore. However, I just made it that if the offense is involved within the 1,000 feet in the boundaries of any school premises or within a juvenile, it's just a misdemeanor of the third degree. So, whatever there. Going on to the adjustments to 513.03, which is the drug abuse section. That would change on page 18. We're looking at C2, where previously, if the it says it basically says makes it a minor misdemeanor of having more than the amount allowed under 3780, but really less than the amount that's a felony level. So if you have more than 200 grams of marijuana, that's a felony of the 5th degree in Ohio. It's a little with, and we could talk about this, with adult use extract, again, it's that hashish level. And it's interesting because there's a differentiation between liquid distillate and the hard amount. And even more interestingly, most labs do not test gummies anymore. Because it screws up the machines. These machines, you run through, and what it really does, it breaks apart the molecules, and it creates these there's two machines. One is basically a sound wave type thing. Based on the waves, it tells you what the chemical makeup is. Another one kind of breaks it, and just like a glass shattering or a plate shattering, cocaine would shatter the same exact way each individual cocaine that you find. But with those machines, it's an incredibly long process when you're doing these gummies now, which is what these adult use extracts are going to be. There is also, in the liquid form, it's a vape, and that's a whole other story. But I just said above 15 grams. If we're charging it under the misdemeanor level in our ordinances, it would be a minor misdemeanor. And then there's another interesting thing that other municipalities throughout the state has done. It, in a sense, decriminalizes in a way where there isn't any real consequences. Because minor misdemeanor, if my memory serves me correct, a violation is a $150 fine. This would mandate that you cannot order a fine. And, looking at case law for sorts of things where you're lowering amounts, there's a general rule that you're not allowed to raise something that's in the misdemeanor level to a felony if you're a municipality, and you can't do the reverse. You can't make something a felony into a misdemeanor. It's been held that you can move it around in the misdemeanor range. There's one case, I forgot, one district that's not the 8th or anywhere comparable that said minor misdemeanor is its own could be argued its own category between M1s through M4s because there's no jail time associated with it. But the reason why you don't see any case law about saying like, hey, you can't have this offense, there's going to be no fine, and you can order, because a defendant withstanding would have to challenge that, and you'll find very few defendants that would appeal getting less of a punishment. So in that sense, it kind of sends a message like, here, look, yeah, you'll have a ticket on the record, and that's what it is. You'll have a minor misdemeanor ticket for it, but there won't be any fines or court costs. But that's certainly a policy decision among my fellow members of council. Would have to decide in terms of that. So those essentially in terms of the criminal portions of the code. And talking about marijuana paraphernalia in here. So paraphernalia is considered anything that would be used to ingest or to grow marijuana, or to put it in a form to ingest. And especially now with currently under 3780, you're allowed 6 plants and things like that. Complexities of enforcement, marijuana paraphernalia, and it was created as a different section under code, because you have paraphernalia as, for ingesting cocaine or heroin through syringes or pipes, and that was, and they created marijuana paraphernalia as a different category because it was seen as less serious, and they had less serious offenses. And I say, and it's in my mind that since the majority, if you're ingesting marijuana and you're above the age of 21, really anything you're going to use to ingest it is going to be legal. It's really going to be limited to people under 21. I decided to just repeal it. There is an argument, of course, that you could have it in there, limited to people under the age of 21, and keep it in there because people under 21 are not allowed to cultivate it or smoke it anyway. And of course, you're only allowed to have 6 plants, but then you would have to show that your paraphernalia is being used for greater than 6 plants, and that gets a little hairy too. So that's something, of course, that is also up for debate, but that has been the thinking behind the adjustments to the sections of our ordinances that touch marijuana in our city code on the criminal side.
Thank you for that thorough explanation. Felt like I was at one of your closing statements or something. And I also understand that the law department sent over an ordinance and indicated that there's still work to be done here, but I'm wondering if the law department is prepared, or the administration, the mayor, to talk about some of their proposed language and kind of how they see this framework going about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important for council to know how the law department is going about this. On the criminal side, the criminal ordinance, which is what this committee is about, we went to our prosecutors who know our criminal ordinances inside and out and work with them and prosecute under them. So we had our lead prosecutor, Ms. Miranda, draft changes to our ordinance consistent with the Ohio Revised Code. She did that over a period of weeks, was very attentive to the importance of it. When she was done, the 4 of us, myself, Assistant Director Swallow, Assistant Director Crossman, and Ms. Miranda sat in a room, had a drafting session. We went through her proposed changes line by line over 2.5 hours. And we did that last week in preparation for this evening. And we concluded at the end that we're getting there, but we're still not comfortable with the work product that we have. We have submitted to you the work product in its current form, just so you can see where the thinking is from the law department, and especially the prosecution team in our office. It would be helpful, I believe, to go over just some key additions that we're thinking about as set forth in the draft that you have in front of you. I've asked Ms. Swallow to be here to just describe some of the key additions. And then if there's interest, I can raise some questions we have with the original draft so that the law department can understand the intent of the committee, of the drafter, so we can effectuate the intent, and then we can address the policy issue. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Swallow for the additions, but given that the law department just needs more time, Ms. Miranda needs more time, we would respectfully request another committee meeting if the committee is inclined in about 3 weeks. I think I can commit to you that our criminal ordinance as drafted by Ms. Miranda and the law department will be something we're comfortable with proposing at that time. We'll have Ms. Miranda here as well to answer any specific questions. So that's our suggestion for your consideration. But in the meantime, I'm going to have Ms. Swallow talk about some of the more general additions that we have put in the draft before you. Thank you.
Thank you. There were mainly 4 additions that were added to the draft that was presented. The first was to include a definition of enclosure for those 6 plants that an individual is able to grow for personal use. The Ohio Revised Code does require that they be enclosed. However, the Revised Code doesn't define it, so we did some research looking at other states and how they manage that, and included that definition. There were no prohibitions for use by those under the age of 21. We wanted to be clear that we had a local code so that we could enforce that as that arises. There was no provision included for adults driving while using marijuana or others smoking it in the vehicle, which is, again, in the Revised Code, so we pulled that in. And then a violation for unlawful cultivation. So if somebody is outside of those 6 plants, that we would have a local code provision that we could enforce.
Thank you, and I'll admit I'm digging through these, so I would ask, though, the members of the committee that have thoughts on this to, so I'm clear with the administration, most of the intent of your drafting is included within what you sent today, but some of the nuance of it might change.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be productive. I'd hate to review all this and have a bunch of comments and then it changes. So, and I think that's, I don't, the rush, right? I mean, I think we already have a policy that council has approved that basically prioritizes enforcement of this, and also this code is what it is now. I think it makes sense for us to make sure we are thoughtful about this and do the right thing. It is quite new. And I would ask members of the committee that, in advance of the next meeting, I'm glad to hear that Ms. Miranda will be here to kind of speak to her experience as a prosecutor with these provisions and what the industry, particularly municipal prosecution, is dealing with as it relates to this. But I'd ask that all of us on the committee or other members of council really review this and come prepared, or even ask in advance of the meeting some of the questions we may have. I think I see the intent of where the administration is going, and I think it's thoughtful. I just want to make sure we get it right. Any other members of the committee or council have any questions or thoughts on this? Mr. Bullock.
Thanks. Appreciate the conversation tonight, and like the chair, I will benefit from having a little more time to wrap my head around the different drafts, but also, I'd welcome a discussion here amongst council and the administration. What are we aiming for? What's the intent of our policy? The immediate answer is we got to comply with state law. But are there, as Councilman Shackner, the author, the primary author, has pointed out, there's some policy decisions where the municipality may have some discretion. What ought those things to be? You know, I kind of approach this with an open mind. One question that comes to mind, and I apologize if this has been mentioned, but use in parks and on public streets. You know, the statewide issue was to regulate marijuana as alcohol. That was the concept anyway. And there are rules around.
So I can,
Go ahead.
the law department can correct me, but just to answer right away, what we passed last year, smoking and vaping in parks, is all smoking and vaping.
All smoking and
Yeah,
vaping.
yeah, so it's, no matter what you're combusting or.
Right. And in addition, though, there's on the streets, right? So, for example, we have open container laws, and then we have special event permits that might, after following a permit with the city for special events, et cetera, it might in some delimited locations and times allow, you know, open. So to me, I mean, that could be a rule of thumb that, well, you know, I don't know if that's appropriate. You know, if Lakewood Alive has a, you know, a beer garden at its meltdown event, does that now, you know, could they have the option to include a marijuana garden as well? You know, that would be on that applicant to decide whether they wanted to propose that, but is that something that we want to achieve under the law? But the real point, you know, I've already had the experience of being at not a Lakewood park, but a different park not far, Edgewater Park, wonderful park. Some adult was using something that did not smell like tobacco, clear across, you know, and they weren't bothering anybody, but it brought to mind that, you know, what are the norms, okay? And the same goes for, I'm pretty sure people are using not tobacco in a lot of cars and walking up and down the street. Should that be part of the acceptable behavior that we have in Lakewood now that there's a change in state law? You know, so I welcome some thoughtful, you know, just big picture thinking about this, and then we can understand how we want to craft the local ordinances accordingly. I think there's my own, to put my cards in there, there's probably some middle ground, right? That the concept here is that adults doing responsible use should have the ability to do responsible adult behavior, but there are some social norms that aren't always perfectly followed, admittedly, around alcohol use in public, or rather in our restaurants, which may have a patio and access to and egress to the public right-of-way, but we have a system of not only laws, but manners, you know, community norms that apply. You know, to me, there's some version of that that we would be going for. And vaping is only one form of ingesting marijuana. There's gummies and other stuff. So is gummies in the parks okay? I think it would be in our current ordinances, because as the chair just described, it's vaping and smoking that's addressed, but not other forms of consumption, right? There's some things to think through here. And again, I approach this with an open mind, but I would welcome not just the legal mechanics here, but what is the policy that we're trying to aim for a good and vibrant community? Thanks.
Yeah, and I imagine some of that is handled in the state law as well, so, you know, we wouldn't need to repeat it unless we wanted to change it or modify it, but I think Councilman Shackner has.
Yeah, I just have a few questions. Speaking of that, I mean, we have laws on public intoxication and things like that would be covered. We also have nuisances, you know, if people are doing something that's offensive to others, could be applicable. I just have some questions about the additions, and if you don't have an answer available now, that's fine, just when it is. One, in terms of, isn't driving under the influence of marijuana or anything, isn't that already covered in 3301? You have, it's drug of abuse or alcohol or combination thereof, and there is already, as measured by gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, person has a concentration of marijuana metabolite per serum at least 35 nanograms marijuana metabolite per milliliter, so on and so forth. Wouldn't that cover anything?
So it's two different offenses. OVI is operating it with that concentration in your system. The state law also prohibits you from smoking in a car, and I would have to go back and look at it. I'm not sure if it's with anybody else in the vehicle, but it doesn't cover gummies and things like that. It's the actual smoking of the product and the smoke that's created in that vehicle that is prohibited. And there are some advantages to being able to charge locally. As to Councilman Bullock's point, public smoking is prohibited in the Ohio Revised Code. And that was a conversation we had after we got this draft together, that's something that we probably also want to incorporate in the local code, just because of the advantages that we have with charging somebody locally as opposed to charging them with an Ohio Revised Code provision.
Is that, and just out of curiosity, is that prohibition of just physically smoking in the vehicle, is that in HB 86, or is that actually in the 3780 prohibited conduct?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay. And in terms of addressing people under the age of 21, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I thought I may have covered that if we go to page 18, or any amount of marijuana in any form, and the person is under the age of 21. Drug abuse is a minor misdemeanor.
I think that only applies to gifting, so it wouldn't.
There's two sections. I have it in gifting, and on page 18 is under the drug abuse section of
What code section is that?
51303.
We're looking at so many different.
Yeah, I know,
versions.
it's tough.
51303.
51303.
Thank you.
So it would be 51303C2. My head was spinning after doing this too. This is just the way the charter, if anybody cares, requires you to repeal and replace when you're adjusting things. So it creates a very difficult to read document at times when you're trying to.
I'm sorry, did you say D2?
C2, as in
B
cat.
as in Bob?
As in cat, sorry.
Oh, C.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keeping in line the time here, I do want to be mindful of that. Another committee starts at 6:30. Are there any other kind of big picture?
Not at the moment. I haven't had a chance to carefully review the new proposal, but I'm sure we'll all go through it and match it up, and I'm excited to see a final product and see where we could go forward on this. Things seem to be held up in the General Assembly. It doesn't look like the House is too eager to act on their half, and of course now marijuana technically is legal now, but I have faith in our officers and our law department to, even if the code isn't all set up on the criminal code, to go what the state law is currently, which is, yeah.
And is that what's happening? I assume I feel
It is, actually, the prosecutors have communicated with the police department and officers directly to let them know what can and cannot be enforced under our local code and what the new requirements are under the Ohio Revised Code.
Thank you. And so with that in mind, if there are there any other comments?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, make sure I heard correctly. So the law department's continuing its work on it, on amendments or a different version. What's the principle that you're pursuing there? Are you just simply trying to work through the sheer volume of detail there, or to understand more precisely what the city's role is, given that there's a new state law?
I believe Councilman, our goal is to be as comprehensive as possible. Make sure the local ordinances include everything that makes sense for the city to include. And that's based on the judgment of our prosecution team. Just to get back in that regard, in terms of trying to be as comprehensive and as clear, in response to Councilman Schachner's legitimate point that the original draft does speak to the use of marijuana by minors, I think Ms. Miranda recognized that. But her goal was to put all of the related offenses together. The use by somebody under 21, but also using fake IDs by that individual, soliciting other people to purchase it for you. So she has that all together. There will be some repetition, and I talked to her about this, especially in her proposed penalties, but she says that is not unusual that we repeat the penalties. So our goal, Councilman Bullock, is to draw on the talent that we have in this city and try to be as comprehensive as possible, and knowing that when it's all said and done, it likely won't be perfect, but it'll be our best effort.
Oh, certainly appreciate that, and I think it's smart to put it all in one section. Easier to read, easier for people to understand, easier for prosecutors to find it. And there's more than one way to skin a cat, as my English teacher used to say. So it's one way to do it.
Yeah, the
Councilman
only-
Strubing?
Yeah, the only piece I wanted to add was it is confusing, especially in one sentence when you talk about a plant, an extract, and an age. If we could break those out and make it a little bit easier to understand, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, anytime a provision of our code comes up, I always try to give a full read through to see if there are any other just general readability things we can make, edits we can make. So I intend on, getting a cup of tea and spending some time with this provision.
Along that same line, when we're talking in the same sentence about an ounce and a gram, that sometimes can become confusing too. And I know, and from your explanation, the 200 grams becomes the felony, right?
Yeah, and that's the confusing part, because the 3780 dealt in ounces, whereas the revised code deals in grams.
Yeah.
So, converting, it's about pointing people to different sections.
I
And
definitely had my calculator
Yeah.
out today trying to figure out the math here, so maybe that's something that could be further explained as well.
Yeah, and I do think that this committee will benefit from having Ms. Merriam here too to explain her experience with these provisions. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to defer this.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? None? Okay. Then, with no other business for this committee, I'll go ahead and, without objection, adjourn. And the next committee meeting will start whenever the chair of that committee wants to start it. Thank you. Was there a sign-up sheet?
Why don't we take it in the next?
Yeah, I would take, we will, the chair has indicated of the next committee, we also are going over marijuana items when it relates to our zoning code and planning code. So if you'd like to give public comment in that committee meeting that will start in a minute, the chair will let you, and we can hear you. We'll all be here.
It's at the discretion of the chair. We do have a regular council meeting at that starts at 7:30, and if it's about
So are you seeking to speak about the decriminalization of marijuana or the operation of marijuana dispensaries? Okay.
so the regular meeting at 7:30 would be more time, because then you'll have all of council here. It's just like the committee members currently. Sorry, it's confusing, I understand. Yeah. Well, that's who they want to hear.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and adjourn, and then, thank you.